Our first lesson this morning is from Jeremiah, chapter 4, starting at verse 18. Your ways and your doings have brought this upon you. This is your doom. How bitter it is. It has reached your very heart. My anguish, I writhe in pain. Oh, the walls of my heart. My heart is beating wildly. I cannot keep silent, for I'm hearing the sound of the trumpet, the alarm of war. Disaster overtakes disaster. The whole land is laid waste. Suddenly my tents are destroyed, my curtains in a moment. How long must I see the standard and hear the sound of the trumpet? For my people are foolish. They do not know me. They are stupid children. They have no understanding. They are skilled in doing evil, but do not know how to do good. I look on the earth, and lo, it was waste and void, and to the heavens, and they had no light. I look on the mountains, and lo, they were quaking, and all the hills moved to and fro. I looked, and lo, there was no one at all. And all the birds of the air had fled. I looked, and lo, the fruitful land was a desert, and all its cities were laid in ruins before the Lord, before his fierce anger. For thus says the Lord, the whole land shall be a desolation, yet I will not make a full end.
And our gospel lesson this day comes to us from the book of Luke. There in the 15th chapter, beginning at the first verse. All the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to Jesus to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it upon his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I found my sheep that was lost." Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous who need no repentance. What woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I found the coin that I had lost." Just so I tell you, there is greater joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. And Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. So end our lessons for this day. Helen Huey's life is going to be lifted up next Saturday morning. Helen, in the first year that I was here, gave to me a great gift from her mother-in-law. Back in the days of the Second Great Awakening, when religious revivals were going on here in Skaneateles, and this sanctuary was built, Jenny Huey was a child in this church, and she had a series of hymn books of old, wonderful old gospel hymns. And one of these caught my eye. We love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and God's glory, of Jesus and God's love. We love to tell the story because we know 'tis true. It satisfies our longings as nothing else would do. You folks have been extremely patient with me over the last 5-6 years as I've tried to use poetry in the worship service. Many of you have been very frustrated at the rhyming, at the iambic pentameters, at when are we ever going to get done with the sing-song in worship. But the point of it was that in our normal conversation, we don't speak poetry. And our worship of God is not our normal conversation. Our worship of God is not the normal things that people say to each other. This is better than what mortals provide. Instead, we sing the Psalms. Instead, we share our faith. It needs to have a different cadence. It needs to have a different rhythm. But having done that for many years and not wanting to get bored with what we've been doing, this year I had a different theme for us. This year I hope that every worship service we will start with a story of faith, a Bible story. This morning from Genesis 1. Stories that are very familiar to many of us, but we've often forgotten. This week I was meeting with a couple who were preparing to get married, and the groom grew up Roman Catholic and grew up in Europe. And he suddenly stopped as we were meeting together and he said, when I went to parochial school, we learned what page that scripture passage was on. We learned what chapter, we learned what book, we learned what verse, so we could always find the passage. But you want us to understand it. You want us to apply it to our marriage and to our lives. That's not memorization. That's application of the story. We've got to know the stories. Our lives are so full of stuff. So much coming at us all the time. There are so many different frequencies on the radio, so many different channels on cable TV that we can get news, different news, on each and every one, with a different spin on each and every one. And if that's not bad enough, in addition to reality, we have scripted reality shows, and we have sitcoms, and we have game shows, and we have all the rest of the stuff that's coming at us. 100 years ago, we didn't have all of this information. Instead, as a farming community, in the morning, you would read a proverb and go out and work throughout the day, reflecting on that sentence all day long. My hope is that this year, each week, we'll plant the seed of one story. And throughout the week, it'll come back to us over and over again, and in that way nurture us and help us to understand differently. We love to tell the story, more wonderful it seems than all the golden fancies of all our golden dreams. An important reason we tell the stories is to remind us of our place in creation, to remind us that we're not the center of the universe. In this society, we're taught over and over again to go for the gusto, to go for all you can get, carpe diem, seize the day. But in faith, we come to realize we are a part of creation. As Ginny read for us in the call to worship this day, in the beginning, there was a void in time and space. There was a gap. And in that gap was darkness. It's like, have you ever had that dream that you are startled in the middle of the night and everything is blackness and you're not sure where anything is? The power's gone out, there's no clock radio, there's no night light, there's no light at all, and you're not sure what's right and what's left and what's up and what's down. That was the chaos. Without time and space, a void. And God commanded light. Not to wipe out all the darkness, but to provide balance to it. I love old movies. And one of the things I love especially about old movies is that they're not in Panavision. They're not in Kodachrome. They're not in high definition. Instead, they're in black and white. And what you come to realize with black and white is you see a great deal more texture. You see shadow. You see various different grays, and it gives a greater depth to the scene than you can see in the greatest high definition. God did not eliminate the chaos or the darkness by creating light, but instead created balance in the beginning. And phase by phase, one thing after another, God created the earth interdependent, interrelated, so much dependent on one another that if one element out of creation goes extinct, all of creation suffers for it. And we were created in the image of God. That does not mean that we have whiskers, all of us. It does not mean we have the same kind of eyes. It doesn't mean we have the same kind of skin or the same number of fingers or anything else is dictated. What it means to be created in the image of God is that we have God's concern for the rhythms of life. This weekend we had a wedding for the Frackenpole family. And in that wedding, every piece of music was composed by the bride's grandfather for her. He was a famous composer. He was the head of the music department at Crane Music School. And he taught to his son a love of music. And we've known Steve here for many years, both as a music teacher at Genesee, but also with the Skaneateles Festival, and also with the Auburn Symphony Orchestra, and also with the Presbyterian Manor, and as a deacon, and as an elder. What many of us didn't know is that Steve married a piano teacher, and they together gave birth to a son and a daughter. And when the music began for them to dance, every member of their family knew how to dance. They knew rhythm. It wasn't that awkward moment where they're standing there saying, do I put my left foot forward or my right? Do I put my hand here or there? They danced. They knew how to do it. That is what it is for us to be created in the image of God. We know the rhythms of life. We know how to dance with creation. We don't have two left feet. Instead, we sing and dance and love to tell the story. We love to tell the story, 'tis pleasant to repeat what seems each time we tell it more wonderfully sweet. For some have never heard it as the message of salvation from God's own holy word. A third reason I love to tell the story is that every time we tell stories, we tell it a little bit differently. Every time we hear the story, we hear things from our own context. We put a little bit different spin on the story by being more distant from it, and we get greater meanings before we lose to history, and all it becomes is a date and a time and a place. Some of you remember Pearl Harbor. You remember December 7th on 1941, a date to live in infamy. I wasn't born at that time. I didn't know what Pearl Harbor was like beforehand. To me, going to Pearl Harbor is like going to Antietam, or going to Gettysburg, or going to Boston Square, or going to Salem. These are historic places where something tragic and terrible happened, and we gather together at the memorial. But 15 years ago in 2001, Ben Affleck and Cuba Gooding were in a film of Pearl Harbor. And for the first third of that, you get to realize what Pearl Harbor was like before. This was like the Garden of Eden. This was a marina, a port with 20 of the greatest battleships of the American Navy. This was a pristine and wonderful place where on Sunday morning people were going about their normal life, going about their normal routine, when suddenly it all changed. We need to remember the story. We need to pass it one to another. Otherwise, it just becomes December 7th, 1941. I do remember the start of the Gulf War. It seems like 24 years ago. I remember our son at 2 standing in front of the television as the bombs kept going off, as the missiles kept flying through the air. And at 2, he stood there saying, no more, no more, no more war, no more bombs, no more. And I remember gathering on the chancel steps with the children to say, we hoped you'd never have to learn about war. Throughout the 20th century, we fought war after war after war, each one claiming this is the war to end wars. But there's still evil in the world. There are still those who want to dominate and oppress others, who see others as being in their way, or being different, or being able to be taken advantage of, and so they want to kill them. And so we've been at war. I remember September 11th. One of the things this week that happened on the radio were 15-year-olds who were born after September 11th happened. And they have no memory of anything before. Everything they've known has been when you go to the airport, you have to take your shoes off. You have to take off your belts. You have to take all the metal out of your pockets. They go through metal detectors going into school. These are the children who are in confirmation class this year. These are the ones who are wrestling with their faith, who never knew that innocence we took for granted, but have only known a time of fear and only known the loss. Can you feel loss when you never knew what you lost? In the last 15 years, we've celebrated a wedding, we've celebrated a memorial, both on September 15th. And on each occasion, the families questioned, is it irreverent for us to celebrate a wedding on September 11th? It was my grandmother's birthday. It was my parents' wedding anniversary. But now it's equated with this other. Can we celebrate our love on September 11th? I want to put a different twist to what took place on September 11th. There comes a time when you get a little bit of distance from a thing that you start to see it differently. You need to recast it so the anger doesn't stay with us, so we're not perpetually at war, but instead we can begin to think differently. And what I would have us think about are the police who've gotten such a reputation in the last year, but that day rushed into the buildings that were collapsing. The ambulance drivers, the first responders, the police who went in to care for others. I had a good friend who was the pastor over at East Syracuse. Many of you remember Deb Thomas, who was our parish associate a few years ago. Deb is now the pastor there, but Doug, who was the pastor for 30 years, was a first responder. And when 9/11 happened, he got in his car and he drove to Battery Park. He didn't know what he would do, but he wanted to be there to help, rushing in to help the lost. He donned a mask and he sat and talked to people. Those who'd come out of the buildings, those who'd helped others out of the buildings, those who were searching for life they couldn't find. Doug developed lung cancer from the jet fuel and the building ash that had fallen. But on his deathbed, he was asked, if you knew what you would lose, if you knew that this would cost your life, would you still have done it again? And he said, it's not about heroism. Our purpose in faith is to seek the lost. That is who we are. We go after the lost. If we don't have that, we don't have our identity. Jesus told these stories because for a shepherd, you were a hired hand and you were given responsibility for 100 sheep. If you could not show some evidence of those 100 sheep, you would be charged with having stolen them. So if a bear or a wolf or a lion stole one of your sheep, you had to pursue it and get some remnant, a leg, a tail, an ear, something from that sheep to bring back to prove that you had not eaten it. Otherwise, your reputation, your identity, your family's honor, everything would be destroyed because you had lost something. I love this story about the woman, but we need to understand its context, because this was a time in which there were not professional women working outside of the home. The woman has 10 silver coins. Why did she have 10 silver coins? This was her dowry. This was the money her mother and her grandmother had saved over their lifetimes to give to her for her getting married. And she had saved it throughout her married life for her children to give to them. If she lost even one coin, that would be like losing one of her children. She wouldn't have enough to pass on to them. It wouldn't be the same. So it's everything to her to find that lost. That is what it is for God with us, to seek us out. And when God finds us, to rejoice. I know I ask a great deal. A great deal. We ask for your attendance. We ask for your alertness. We ask for you to sing the hymns. We ask for your silence during the prayers. We ask for your offerings. We ask for your giving in service. This year I ask one more thing. One more thing. That you would come each week and bring your friends to hear the story and share with one another. You know, I heard the story of the Garden of Eden, all brand new. And it made the story in Jeremiah that much more powerful because that's about creation going the other way. I heard the story of the prodigal son. I heard the story of Revelation that I'd never heard in that way before. Hopefully it will be one more kernel to our faith. For we love to tell the story for those who know it best. They seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like all the rest. And when in scenes of glory we sing the new song, 'twill be the old story that we've loved so long. We love to tell the story. 'Twill be our theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and God's love.